think it's fitting. Sister Helen Prejean began her prison ministry in 1981 when she dedicated her life to the poor of New Orleans. While living in the St. Thomas Housing Project, she responded to a request for assistance from an inmate who was sentenced to die in the electric chair of Louisiana's Angola State Prison. She visited him repeatedly and served as his spiritual advisor. In doing so, her eyes were opened to the Louisiana execution process. Sister Helen turned her experiences into a book that is right there in the front. And not only did it make the 1994 American Library Associates Notable Book List, it was also nominated for a 1993 Pulitzer Prize. Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States, was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks. It was also an international bestseller and has been translated into 10 different languages. In January 1996, the book was developed into a major motion picture starring Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen and Sean Penn as the death row inmate. The film was directed and written by Tim Robbins. The movie received 4 Oscar nominations, and as many of you know, Susan Sarandon won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Sister Helen has received numerous awards. I'm only going to comment on 2 of them, including the 1990 Sanctity of Life Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the 2002 Dignitas Humana Award from St. John's School of Theology and Seminary in Minnesota. As part of their award text, and I'm just going to quote a little bit, they said, quote, "You focus the spotlight of reason on the profound moral contradiction that gives the state the power to kill in order to prove that murder is wrong. You have bridged the great chasm between healing for the loved ones of murder victims and mercy for those convicted of taking a life," unquote. Sister Helen has served on the board and has served as the chairperson of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. She is also a member of Amnesty International and an honorary member of Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation. She is currently an honorary chairperson of Moratorium Campaign, a group which is gathering signatures for a worldwide moratorium on the death penalty. On December 18th of 2000, Sister Helen was among several individuals who presented Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the UN, with 2.5 million signatures from people all over the world who are calling for a moratorium on the death penalty. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Sister Helen Prejean.
Does this come off? You have to be physically fit. Darius, the man of the hour. Thank you. Darius, would you just move this over to the side? Thank you. Just great to be here with you. I want to utilize every second that we have together to just share my journey with you. You know, I think the best thing we have to offer each other is not so much the dogmas we believe in or whatever, but let me tell you what happened to me. And then you bounce it off on your experience. And I had never written a book before when I wrote Dead Man Walking. I didn't know I was going to write a book. I didn't know I was going to get involved with this, the whole thing. If you want to Google me, you know how you can Google me? Death penalty nun. I mean, that's what I'm known as now, the death penalty nun. I never dreamed what would happen in this journey. And the first part of the journey was just, for me, it's a deeply Christian thing of understanding that Jesus was on the side of poor people and that I needed to work for social justice. I didn't always understand that. I was a good nun. I was teaching kids. I was doing what proper nuns do. And there was a debate in the community about all this social justice stuff. And I'm going, we're nuns, we're not social workers. How are we going to pick up housing and the poor and racism and all of this stuff? And then there was a moment of enlightenment that came during a conference. And you know, we never know when we're going to get zapped. We never know when enlightenment comes. It's always a gift. And it's never too early to wake up, and it's never too late to wake up. The important thing is that when we wake up, we begin to act out of it. And we were at a conference, and this nun was talking to us, Sister Maria Augusta, and she was talking about Jesus. And I had this little attitude of, yeah, well, I know a little bit about Jesus. Excuse me, I've been meditating on Jesus for 30 years or whatever. And so I can tell you the line. I can tell you the line that changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. She said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Because then he's going to say how God is Father. You could, so close to us, we can call him Abba or Daddy. Every hair of your head is numbered. Let's rain fall on the just and the unjust. And she said, integral to the good news that Jesus preached to the poor was that they would be poor no longer. And I'm thinking, where did he say that? Where did he say that? He didn't say it. Hadn't Jesus said the poor you'll always have with you? As if you're going to change the world. There are always people who are rich. There are always people in these developed countries. There have always been people in the poor countries. That's just the way life is. You really think you're going to get in there as one person and you're going to change that? And then when you read the Gospels carefully, you begin to see the reason Jesus was crucified. You're only crucified if you're a troublemaker. And if he had been this dreamy little preacher, gathered all the people on the hillside, sing, whip out your guitar, sing, love one another right now, and share your loaves and fishes and grapes, and everybody goes home, they never would have crucified Jesus. What incensed the authorities of the day, both the Roman and the religious leaders? He inaugurated a new kind of community that was threatening to everybody. He talked to women publicly. He touched lepers. He ate with people of all. He crossed boundaries. He founded a community where people shared what they had so that nobody was in need. Everybody was treated with dignity. Children weren't even considered persons in the day of Jesus. They were just little workers to be sent out. And he holds up a child and says, whoever receives a child in my name receives me. He changed things so radically. It was upsetting. It was upsetting to everybody. Well, when I heard Sister Maria Augusta say, integral to the good news to the poor was that they would be poor no longer. In other words, you got to start working for justice. When our missionaries in Latin America, as long as they were going into Latin America and just preaching a spiritual gospel that was just up there, nobody killed missionaries. The minute they started working with people, so they're working with cooperatives, so that campesinas could ask for land or ask for just wages so that they could sell their crops, they started getting killed, and the missionaries started getting killed with them. When I went into that talk, I said, well, I'm spiritual. I am not political. I am apolitical. And boy, Maria Augusta was heading me off at the pass. Every time I thought something, there she was. And she said, some of you may be thinking, well, I'm apolitical. I'm spiritual. I'm above politics. And she said, if you don't do anything, if you don't raise a finger, if you don't vote, if you don't question anything, you are supporting the status quo, and that is a very political position to take. And later, I've been asked by the media, what are you a nun doing involved with the death penalty? Isn't that a political issue? Boy, and I come with that little quote, say I'm ready. And I say, isn't it interesting that people who work to change things in society are called political? If you support the status quo and you don't do anything, you're not called political. So this led me to move into the St. Thomas housing projects. New Orleans has 10 major housing projects for poor African-American people. And I had lived in New Orleans a long time, and I'd never gone into any of them. Geographically, I probably traveled less than 1/16 of a mile when I moved into a little apartment, began to work at a place called Hope House with 5 other sisters there. But spiritually, I had traveled a galaxy, and I was coming into the St. Thomas projects not to be a great white savior, to give those poor, struggling people what they need, and go into the adult learning center and educate these people now and give them a proper education. I came to sit at their feet, and I came to listen to the stories, and I came to learn. And boy, did I learn. And my daddy had been successful. He was a lawyer. I grew up in Baton Rouge. We had had African-American people as our servants. In the South, that is what you did. I went to a private school, which was all white. And now I'm the servant of African-American people. And I didn't even see it as charity. I saw it as justice. They served me, now I serve them. People are coming into the Adult Learning Center, and I'm learning what happens. I'm learning about structural poverty and racism because they're coming into the Adult Learning Center, and you'd say to a kid, well, how far did you get in high school? 11th grade. Okay, well, let's see how what your reading level is. And couldn't read, a third grade reader. Was in 11th grade in the public schools, about to graduate, could not read. How is this happening? And then what was happening with the young men and the police? It wasn't a fluke that every now and then there were racist comments of young men hauled in a car and threatened and drugs planted on. All this kind of stuff was going on. To me, it was like the great American dream, the tapestry. Suddenly I was on the backside of the tapestry where all the threads were cut and there were these big holes. And then you hear the rhetoric, come on, kid, anybody could be president. All you got to do is just try. And I could see them like in a river with this centrifugal force of the river pulling them under, because with a poor education and going out to get a job, the job waiting for them was selling Big Macs at McDonald's. That's the job waiting for them. And that with minimum wage, they were still going to be in poverty. And here comes the drug dealer with the gold chain around his neck, nice car, and he is a 12-year-old kid. Hey, kid, run this little bag down for me. Here's a $20 bill. And I learned something, that when the mainstream kind of thing isn't working for you, the great American dream, drugs have become a sub-economy. Who was that rock and roll band that wanted to start a band, these kids, and nobody would give them a loan? So they did drugs for 3 years, had the little cell phone, had the beeper, did the drugs, got the money, started a band. People know where the money is. They know how they can get access to money. And then you say, now go get a decent job now, get a fine upstanding job, or go to college and all that. And I began to just look at it from a different point of view, an entirely different point of view. And I began to be a lot more humble. I used to have a lot of solutions for things. What these people ought to do, you know what they ought to do? I'm going to tell you what they ought to do first. Start picking up all that litter. You ought to see how they litter. They drop things on the ground. And we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue. And I just tried to walk in people's skin. And it's while I was in St. Thomas that one day a friend of mine, there was a prison coalition office right around the corner from Hope House. We bump into each other. It's casual. Bump into each other on St. Andrew Street. He sees me. He's got a clipboard, got a project going. The prison office always had a project going. And I know we got people here who work in detention and who work in prison ministry tonight. Anyway, he said, hey, Sister Helen, you want to write somebody on death row here in Louisiana? It was 1982. We hadn't executed anybody since the 60s in Louisiana. Neither had you. There was an unofficial moratorium in this country. You weren't executing anybody. And I thought, well, yeah, sure, I could write somebody on death row. And I thought I was only going to be writing letters. And he wrote the man's name down on a little white piece of paper, Patrick Sonier, and his prison number and his address, which gave me pause. I'd never written a man. Death row, Louisiana State Prison, Angola, Louisiana. I wrote the man a letter. Problem. He wrote back. Because when you got an encounter going between two human beings, you never know completely where it's going to lead. And he wrote about this 6 foot by 8.5 foot cell. By the way, death row cells where people are kept, Louisiana, Oklahoma, they're underground, are 1 foot shorter on each end than the cells in Abu Ghraib, and people may spend 17, 20 years in those cells, 23 out of 24 hours a day before they kill. But once a society posits that it's okay to kill somebody, so what if you're in a small cell for 17 years? He wrote about his life, I wrote about mine, and then it became very clear he had nobody to visit him. His mother had already had a hard life. She visited the prison one time, and she almost had a mental breakdown. She couldn't make herself go into the building where it said death row, where they were going to kill her boy. She couldn't do it. And he wrote to her, he said, Mama, no, Mama, don't come, Mama. It's okay. You just write me little notes every now and then. So I realized from his letters, he didn't even ask me to come. He just told me that it was lonely and how glad he was to get my letters. So I wrote to him and I said, look, I'll come see you sometimes. Boy, he was just so happy. I'd get these papers back in the very next mail, the visitor form, and he said, look, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun. Would you be my spiritual advisor? I'll fill it in. Yeah, sure, yeah. I don't know, 2.5 years later, they're going to electrocute him to death at midnight on April 5th, 1984. And at 5:45 in the evening, everybody's got to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor, who's going to be me. And then I'll walk with him. And then I'll be saying to him, Patrick, when they do this, you look at me, look at my face, and I'll be the face of Christ for you. I'll be the face of love for you. I think of it like a cross because I get involved with Patrick Sonier and his agony and his whole spiritual journey. And then I find out about the crime and the victim's family. And at first I didn't know what to do about the victim's family because I'm spiritual advisor, not only to Patrick Sonier, but his brother Eddie, who was serving 2 life sentences for the murder. First I didn't know what the murder was, but I did have a question about the legal system. How could you have a murder and you have one brother gets death and one brother gets life? How does that work? Now I know, really know. It doesn't apply exactly to Pat and Eddie Sonier's case, but if there are 2 co-defendants in a murder and there are no other witnesses and one is willing to give state's evidence against the other one for a reduced sentence, and then how do we know if we got the truth? See, here's the big discovery in the second book that I've just finished writing called The Death of Innocence, talking about accompanying 2 people to execution that I believe were innocent. And when you read the story, it's going to break your heart because you're going to find out all the stuff at trial that the jury never heard. You're going to find out all the evidence you're going to find out about the jailhouse witness who lied and then called me on the phone 8 months ago saying, what do I do? Joseph Odell is dead now and I lied and they killed him. What do I do? How do I live with myself? You're going to find out all those things and also the courts that upheld that. In the beginning, I didn't know anything about the law. And, I mean, we don't know anything about the law unless we got a motivation to learn stuff about the law. My daddy was a lawyer. He did all that lawyer talk, and I let all that go over my head. You got to want to be interested in that lawyer talk and get into all these fine, hair-splitting points of the law. But it was my first question. One brother got life and one brother got death, and how did that happen? And was the truth told? And I'm going to find out along the way 2.5 years later. When I went to the Prison Coalition office several months after I started visiting both brothers, and I said, I just want to know background on the case. I want to know what happened. So they bring out the files, big heap of them, open the one on the top, and look into the faces of 2 beautiful teenage kids. Loretta Bork, who was 18, David LeBlanc, 17. And there they were on the front page of the New Iberian, a little town in Louisiana in Acadiana. And they had been murdered. And the headline said, teenagers found murdered. And I read with horror the story of how they were abducted from a lover's lane. The girl had been raped. They were found lying face down near a sugarcane field near St. Martinville and bullet holes in the backs of their heads. And I read that story. And you can't hear about the death of innocent people without being outraged. And one of the struggles we have as a society is, and I just want to say, it is a morally legitimate thing to be outraged when we hear about the death of innocent people. Teenage kids, a homeless person, a policeman, a mother carjacked with her children. We read these stories and our blood runs cold and we go, God, that's just terrible. What kind of animal could do something like that? And these words come to our mind like scum and vermin and animal, and because it's such a ghastly act. And then on the other hand, we know, but now we're going to put government in charge of selecting who are the people now who deserve to die for these crimes. There are 14,000 homicides in this country every year. Less than 2% of all the people who kill other people are selected for death. what happens? But with the victim's family, and I think about the mother and father, because this is every parent's worst nightmare, that kids had gone to a football game on a Friday night and they didn't come home. And the next day the sheriff's deputy is there saying, you better come to the morgue with us. We think we have your child. I thought of the parents, and it was an instinct in me that said, I ought to go see those parents. But then I was scared to go see the parents because I'm thinking, I'm the spiritual advisor to the people who killed their child. They're not going to want to see me. I'm the last person in the world they're going to want to see. Or suppose they say to me, sister, you care? You care about our child? Then would you sit with us in the front row? Because we're going to be there and watch them get their due. We didn't get both the brothers, but we got one of them. Can you be there with us, sister? Because to honor our dead child, we want to see justice done. Can you do that? And what would I say to them? Emotionally, I'm hanging on by my fingertips because when we are outraged over the death of a human being, it takes time for us then to kind of settle and then just to see, but what's going to be our response to this? Do we operate out of outrage and then we say, look at our nation, our nation. What we say is those that kill, in Supreme Court language, when they put the death penalty back in Gregg v. Georgia decision of 1976, use this kind of language. There are some crimes which are so heinous, morally outrageous, that it demands the death of the person who did it. It demands their death. So what we really have is a system of justice that says people who do these really terrible crimes deserve to die, and our justice system demands that we kill them. Now, a number of countries in the world kill people for crimes, and they use that kind of language. They deserve death, and that's what the law says. We also, though, will hear politicians saying, not only do we believe in the death penalty because they deserve death, but look at that poor victim's family suffering. And you know what we're going to give that victim's family? We're going to give them a chance to have justice. And so maybe now they got to wait 10, 15, 17, 20 years, but then we'll call them, and justice will be done, and they sit, and they get to watch now as we kill the one who killed their loved one, and that will give them justice, and that will give them healing, and that will give them closure, and that will honor their loved one who was killed. We have built a social policy on that. And the latest little twist of the politicians is they do it to honor the victim's family. In fact, the suffering of the victim's family demands that they do that. When I met the victims' families of the Bourques who had lost their daughter, the LeBlancs who lost their sons, I met them at a pardon board hearing, which is a very public meeting in Louisiana, and it couldn't have been a worse time to meet victims' families, because by then you're so polarized. It's a few days before execution, and people are coming there, and you sign a book when you go in, what side you're on. Are you on the side of the state that wants to execute? It's the closest you ever come to going like into a Roman amphitheater where your thumb goes down, die, or thumb goes up, live. Most of the people coming into the room were there with thumbs down, and to support the victim's family who were asking for the death of Patrick Sonier. I was there with a lawyer and a psychiatrist speak to the clemency board to say, don't kill him. He had been in prison before. He'll be a model prisoner. He'll never kill again. We have a way to incapacitate him from ever killing again. Don't kill him. And that's when I met the victims' families. And I met them outside while the pardon board was voting. And the Bourques were just so angry. And, you know, I don't blame them. I deserved that anger. I hadn't written them a note. I hadn't called them. I hadn't shown them any kind of sign that I cared about their daughter. And right behind them, they walked past me, were the LeBlanc family, Lloyd and his wife Eula, and he walked right on up to me. You know, people have a way of popping out of boxes. Because I think, oh, God, it's going to be bad. I mean, he's just going to be angry just like the other. And he walked right up and he said, Sister, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. Our son David was killed. He was our only son. He said, you can't believe the pressure we under with this death penalty. Where have you been? You didn't come see us. Nobody's coming to see us or to talk to us. And I'm shocked because 10 minutes earlier, he had been the one to stand up for both of the victims' family when the clemency board said, and what are the wishes of the victims' family? And he had been the one to stand up and say, let the execution proceed. 10 minutes later, he's looking in my eyes and he's saying, where were you? Where have you been? All this time you're going to visit Pat and Eddie Sonier, you didn't come see us? And of course, I just said, Mr. LeBlanc, I am so sorry. I didn't think you wanted to see me. I mean, it was so lame. I was so guilty. And he said, he was the one who offered me grace. He's the one who said, sister, look, I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me sometime, and let's talk. And I began to visit him and his wife, who cried for 3 years. If you see the movie and you see Earl Delacroix, who approximates Lloyd LeBlanc, poor woman, she cried a river of tears. I am starting to move into currents of sorrow and loss and evil and violence that I never dreamed existed. But Lloyd LeBlanc was the first victim's family I met, who showed me the healing path, who showed me, he said, you know, when that deputy came to get me that morning to go identify David's body in the morgue, he said, they pulled David's body out on that tray, and I looked down. And you know, Lloyd LeBlanc is a mechanic. And he looked at him, and the first thought was, I can't fix that. And then he said, I just said the prayer I learned as a child at my mama's knee. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And when he comes to the words in the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Later he told me, I said the words. I didn't feel the words. But Jesus told us to forgive. He said, you know, some people think forgiveness is weak, like, you know, forgive and forget, as if you condone that they killed your son. He said, condone. Every time David has a birthday, we lose him all over again. Condone. My wife, we had to move close to the graveyard so that she could visit his body every day. I just went there last Christmas, and we all went over. Vicky, his daughter, their daughter, brought a little Christmas tree. We all went over to David's grave, turned on the little tree. And that connection with him is vital to their life. He said, but you know, here's how I figure it. They kill my boy, but they're not going to kill me. And Jesus said to forgive. The way I see it is, their hate isn't going to kill my love. Lloyd LeBlanc was the first person I ever met who chose the way of healing and love. And I began to realize in him how victims' families are manipulated in the death penalty. He didn't want Patrick Sonier to be executed. He later told me, I want an apology. I want an explanation. I don't want him to kill a boy. Bud Welch, daughter Julie, spoke 3 languages, graduated from Marquette University. He owns a Texaco station in Oklahoma City. April 19th, people run in. Bud, there's been a terrible explosion. Doesn't Julie work in the Murrah building? Oh, God, he goes, and he gets in his car, and he drives as fast as he can. And then he sees the devastation from the bombing. And he just prays, and he hopes against hope, not Julie. Maybe she was in a part of the building where the bomb didn't reach. And she was going that morning to help somebody translate from Spanish to English, some person trying to get their Social Security straight. She was an outstanding young woman, and in adult life, she had become her father's friend. They had lunch every Wednesday, and there he is with all the other grief-stricken people and watching as the firemen, 168 people. If you ever go to Oklahoma City and you ever go to the memorial, and what they have is 168 empty chairs in the memorial for the Oklahoma City Memorial. And I had been to Hiroshima. And when you come into Oklahoma City, I had the same kind of feeling. You know, that was before 9/11 when we had 9/11. But it was that feeling where a whole lot of people have been killed in a city. and 168 people branching out. Almost everybody in the city in some way or another were directly or indirectly connected with somebody killed. Bud Welch is the one who shares his story. And he said, when they came out with Julie's body, all I could think of was get McVeigh. And when they used to bring him for these hearings, they'd put a lead vest on him and take him out of the police car very quickly and get him in the building. I'm glad they had that lead vest on him, because I'd have been one of the people waiting for him. He killed our beautiful daughter, caused this pain to all these people. And all he could think of was, get McVeigh. And he said, I'm smoking 5 packages of cigarettes a day. I'm drinking to go to sleep. All the anger, all the bitterness. And then about 2.5 months after it happened, he's in the car one day. And his moment of revelation, his epiphany, came through the car radio. Because he went to turn it on and remembered being in the car with Julie one day. And the news was coming over about an execution in Texas. And she had turned to her father and said, Dad, that's about nothing but vengeance. She had started an Amnesty International group in her high school, and he knew that. And suddenly he got it. How could he honor Julie's life? She would not ask for the death or the vengeance of the one who killed her. And so how could he and be faithful to his daughter and respect her integrity? Bud Welch is a pretty incredible man. And you know, I've met these people over the years. We have a whole bunch of people in this country who choose the way not of then turning it over to the government and just saying, yeah, avenge for me the death of my child. So now I'm going to let the government kill someone. Some mothers say, I'm not putting another mother through that. That boy, he did a terrible thing. Our family's going to suffer the rest of our life. But to have another mother now have to go and watch as her son's put to death. Bud Welch is looking at TV one day, and he sees a man, and he's in his rose garden, and he glimpsed his eyes. He only looked up at the camera for a minute, but Bud Welch will tell you, I saw pain in his eyes that was just like mine. It was Bill McVeigh, the father of Timothy McVeigh, and some news reporters were over at the house with him in his rose garden. And Bud looked at him and went, and he called up, there's a nun who worked in the parish, and he said, can you arrange for me to meet Bill McVeigh? Picture this, 2 fathers meeting in the rose garden, giving each other a bear hug and sobbing, and Bud Welch saying to him, I don't want your boy to die. The empty chairs that are in the memorial at the Oklahoma City, you know, there, the memorial of all the people killed on that terrible day. Bud said, you know, by the time it came time to kill Timothy McVeigh, most of the families had figured out that if Timothy McVeigh got 168 life sentences, or if he got death, their job was, they had, their spiritual task was to deal with the empty chair. Because he had to deal that Julie, who had been alive, had been taken from him. And that was the task. Killing Timothy McVeigh, or Timothy McVeigh disappearing into prison and you never hear from him again. Even if you watched it, you came home and the chair was still empty. And that's the way he presented the spiritual journey and task that faced him. These people are incredible because they are our most credible witnesses to us as a society. Marietta Yeager, whose little daughter Susie, 7 years old, was ripped out of a tent during a camping trip in Montana by a madman and brutally killed, remembers the last night with Susie in the tent. All the 5 kids were in one tent, and she had gone to kiss him goodnight, and Susie was way over at the end of the tent, which is how he ripped it open and grabbed the first kid who was on there. And so Marietta was just going to blow her a kiss. And Susie stepped across her brothers and sisters, said, oh, no, Mama, that's not how we say goodnight. Put her arms around her mama and said, good night, Mama, I love you. And she said, thank God she did that. That was my last time that I was able to tell Susie that I loved her. And she said, she went through the anger, she went through the rage. Of course people go through anger and rage. Of course they do. How can they not? Who wouldn't? But then she quickly figured it out because she knew Susie. And she said, how would I honor? Susie was a very loving child. She wouldn't even step on bugs. How could I honor Susie? By asking the state to kill a very sick man. So we have incredible stories. And when I meet the victims' families, then I begin to go to the murder victim support groups, and I'm shocked because I hear person after person saying everybody was leaving them alone because they didn't know what to do with their pain. They're staying away from them. One woman said, you know, with my good friend, I expected more from her. I tried to talk about Mary, and she said, oh, you really should be past that by now. Or why don't you see a counselor? Because people don't know how to be present to it or to help people, and they stay away from them. So then I'm thinking, death row inmates are pariahs on one end of this thing, and murder victims' families are really being neglected and treated like pariahs on the other end. So I did a simple thing. In New Orleans, we started a group called Survive so victims' families could come together and they could share their grief and accompany one another and fall apart and come together and help one another. And we need that all over this country. And every state has victim compensation funds to help people with the real stuff, not symbolically choosing one family out of every 500 and saying, oh, you get to come witness while we kill the one, because it's just a symbolic activity of people chosen to be killed. When we started Survive, there were about 40 women in the group, and most of them African American, and that's when I learned about race and the death penalty. Most people, when you raise a question of race, say how many people of color are on death row. And that is a race question because it's about 48%, which is disproportionate for the number of people of color in the population. But where you really see it is I learned from the women in the group. 40 women. Shirley Card had 2 sons killed within 6 months. None of the cases had even come to trial. Some of them, the prosecutor didn't even send an investigator out. And this mother had to share that the boy who killed her son, she saw him coming out of the building every morning, going and doing his stuff. They hadn't even done an investigation. And I had noticed when I lived in the St. Thomas housing projects that every time white people were killed, it was on the front pages of the paper. And when people in St. Thomas were killed, you were lucky to find it on page 30, 5 lines. And that's when I realized we don't value the lives of people the same, so we're not equally outraged by every death that happens in our society. And it correlates by race. Across this nation, you look at the 500 people you have on death row. Here in California, 8 out of every 10 of them are going to be there because they killed a white person. And when we're talking about the killing of human beings, nobody should be killed. The ultimate violation of human life is to kill another person. But then when you put government in charge of saying, okay, now we're going to kill the worst of the killers. In this next book I'm writing, The Death of Innocence, that's ENTS because it's about 2 people. And then you got to descend into what the courts are doing. You got to descend into what kind of structure has the Supreme Court built that we say that we can kill some people for their crimes in this country. And the criteria they have given, when you boil it down, is this. And nobody knows how to do it because it's impossible. The criteria is we don't give the death penalty for ordinary murders, just for the worst of the worst. If you know of anybody who has had someone killed, what is an ordinary murder? You kill one person, but let's talk about that person. Well, he was 15 years old. He had a life. He was just beginning. He was just, everybody is a universe that cannot be replaced. We don't have a way to do it, and I show that in the next book. And we have to take on what the courts have done. And Justice Antonin Scalia, maybe some of you know of him. He's on the Supreme Court. Well, he goes duck hunting with my brother Louis in Louisiana. Louis breaks the news to us about 8 years ago. Guess who I'm going duck hunting with? And I said, Louis, Justice Scalia, you know, he's one of the people, he always votes for the death penalty, no matter what the circumstances, mentally retarded, young, whatever. And he goes, sis, we don't talk about that court stuff. We just hunt. He's in the book, in this next book. I meet him in the airport, coming back from a duck hunt. And he does liven up that chapter. I mean, the encounter with him was very providential. And we have to get into the arguments, though. What does our Constitution tell us? Can't we execute people? Doesn't the Constitution say that? And I, in my little foreword in the book, I say, stick with me on these constitutional issues. Now, don't flake out on me. Because the first 2 stories in the book you're gonna keep turning the pages because they're such stories that are going to really touch your heart and move you immensely. The constitutional issues. Is it according to the Constitution of the United States to execute human beings? Is it? They say, yeah, the framers did allow for the death penalty, but they also allowed for constitutional protections that anybody brought to trial is supposed to have. How do we explain that equal justice under law is written, carved into the marble on the portico of the Supreme Court of the United States? But in our track record of actually doing executions these 28 years, why is it that 80% of all executions are done in the 10 southern states that practice slavery the longest? How did that happen? Doesn't everybody have the same constitution? Doesn't everybody have the same guidelines? And in the book, I get into it, and it has a lot to do with climate. It has a lot to do with climate. We learned about climate with Abu Ghraib. I mean, we know what the international law says about not torturing people or degrading them. What happened in Abu Ghraib? Things got a little out of hand, and it had to do with climate. Here in this place with these people, that's okay. We'll look the other way. Climate. Not what's written in the law, but what is the official or the unofficial or societal way of saying, you just go ahead now, it'll be all right. You can do whatever you want to that guy, because after all, we know they're guilty and they're suspected terrorists. Look what they're doing to us. We got a right to do it to them. Climate? You want to hear about climate? Nick Trinacosta, who's one of the hero lawyers in this book, who tried so hard to save Dobie Williams' life, the first story, African-American man with an IQ of 65 that was executed in Louisiana. Visited him for 7 years. Nick was visiting. And he knew this certain judge. And he said, you still got your awards hanging on your wall? He said, yep, you want to see them? So Nick, of course, goes, oh, yeah, sure, I'd love to. He brings him in his office. He has 3 plaques hanging on the wall. It's a Louisiana pelican flying, and in the talons are hypodermic needles. It's called the Prick Award. And it's an attaboy plaque that prosecutors give to each other. Like, good going, you got a death penalty. And then he ran for judge. And he ran for judge and said, I'm tough on crime. I got 3 death penalties. My opponent here, he's weak. He's soft on crime. He didn't get any. And they brag about it. And they run for public office on it. And they win. Because there's a climate in the South, and you can trace it back to slavery. As soon as the Emancipation Proclamation happened and slaves were freed, Southern legislators started doing what was called the Black Code books, and what the punishment was if a person of color did a crime, and what the punishment was if a white person did a crime. And just a couple of years ago, Texas executed a white person for killing a black person, the first time in the history of the state they ever did that. We got race, we're colorblind in this country. In the application of criminal justice, it has to do with who's outraged over the victim and what's the system in place. Also part of climate is that whenever bills come before the Louisiana legislature or Virginia or Mississippi or Florida to give adequate defense to people on trial for their lives, they ridicule it. They vote it out. And they say, well, in Louisiana, look, all those defense attorneys defending those scum, they have to get whatever money they need for defense from traffic tickets. And if there are not a lot of speeders that month, or they don't get many traffic tickets, then you don't get DNA testing, or you don't get separate investigative, you don't get expert witnesses. They have to fight for it, and it's a political thing. And Louisiana is never going to say, oh, no, now this isn't fair. You know, when we come to trial, that's supposed to be an adversarial system and a way of getting the truth, and we want the defense to have everything they need. It is never going to be that way. We need the Supreme Court to look at the constitutional protections and just say, it sure doesn't seem to be happening in all parts of the country, does it? So we can't do this thing. California's interesting. You have over 500 people. You have more people on death row any state. Over 28 years, you executed 9 people. That's a big gap. Texas has executed over 300 and almost 30 people. They're going to kill 12 more people in Texas before the end of January. What's going on? What's going on? Climate is what's going on. And the constitutional protections and the guidelines are not working. And it's like you have a ship and the rudder's supposed to guide it. Well, the ship is up on the wave and the rudder is clean out of the water when it comes to applying the death penalty. I try to make the argument in the book, have we not reached a point of practice to recognize that we cannot do guidelines? And then the jurors, what are jurors to do? Jurors are just like us. And given this impossible task of a terrible crime here, terrible mitigating circumstances, what happened to this person, beaten as a baby, as a child, and then they had to go in the room and they're told, now you weigh the aggravating circumstances of the crime and you weigh the mitigating circumstances, and then you decide, should that person live or die? Who knows that? That's inscrutable. It's inscrutable. Who knows who should live and who should die? And we come to human limitations here because we step off in this. This is a God question. This is God stuff. This ain't human stuff. And then you got politics driving it, and you have all of this selective use of the death penalty. We can't do it. We can't do it. Let's hang up the thing. Just hang it up. And California can be done when citizens wake up and let your politicians know that we have moratorium petitions calling for it, and we're going to send them right over to Death Penalty Focus. You got a fantastic group in this state working to awaken people on this and to call for a moratorium till finally the voices of the people are sufficient to say, they give the signal to politicians, you don't have to run for election in this state on the death penalty because we have an alternative way to protect ourselves and we don't have to kill people anymore. I end up being on both sides because I've accompanied Lloyd LeBlanc and the victims' families, and then unbelievably to me, I am with Patrick Sonier in this place of death. Not just an ordinary place of death. I had been with people in a hospital when they died. I have seen people and accompanied people and been with people when they died. But this is not that. This is a place kept immaculately clean. Because if there's anything we want to do in the United States, it is to keep death antiseptically clean. I gave a talk one time to a middle school, and a 7th grader stood up afterwards. He said, well, hey, sister, this is what I want to know. You know, they're going to kill that guy, right? Yeah. Well, how come they put that alcohol on that person's arm before they put that needle in? And I said, so we can have a clean death. And now they're finding out they do 3 drugs. Only 2 are really necessary. One is the sodium pentothal for the person to be put to sleep. The one that really kills you is the one that sends you into cardiac arrest. But they inject a second drug, potassium bromide. Veterinarians don't use this drug on animals when they're putting them down. You know why? You know what it does? It paralyzes all of your muscles so that you don't move. One woman testified, they're bringing it before the courts. She testified she had been given that drug and she had eye surgery. And she felt everything. She could not so much as move her eyelids or her lips or her finger to say, you're hurting me. This is excruciating pain during this 2-hour operation on her eye. And the veterinarians don't use it because they say if the animals get into trouble and they're feeling pain and something's gone wrong, they have no way to register it. We inject chromium, potassium bromide. I forget the technical names of it. And they're raising it because why is it injected? So the witnesses don't have to watch as a person twitches and jerks and goes into death. That's how much we are cleaning this thing up. Cleaning it up. I accompanied a man, James Aldridge, to execution in Texas, and they have killed so many people in Texas. The guards, the people bringing you in, I mean, it's almost like this is what we do. 300, he was the 325th person killed. What happens to the guards? What happens to the people? Participate in the death of all these people. And it's like something's laminated over. Something's like, well, here we go, number 325. After you killed 300 people, I've been through a lot of these executions, it all gets to be the same. All clean, all antiseptic. Say your last words. Here's a protocol. When I was with Patrick, first of all, I couldn't believe they really were going to kill him. I couldn't believe they were going to do this. And it was just incredible to me. I mean, the days were going by, and I'm working with the lawyers. Like, isn't there anything anybody can do? And you feel the time sliding, and I'm spending time with him in the death house. And the death house, they got geraniums growing on outside. I mean, they got a little duck pond. And you look at that building, you never notice the building where you kill people. And then I go in, the tiles all polished, coffee pot percolating, little tablecloth where the witnesses are going to sign afterwards. Everybody being polite. I mean, really being polite. Like, hey, Pat, you need anything? You need a cigarette? The guards bring him cigarettes, coffee. And I'm talking to him. And we're talking to each other. We had visited for 2.5 years. I got to know him as a human being. The whole story came out. He was not innocent. He had been with his brother when they had abducted other teenage kids. Nobody had been killed. But this night, and he said it was never supposed to happen, but Eddie was in a highly emotional state, and something happened, and Eddie killed the kids. And I'm visiting with Eddie. And Pat said, but I'm not innocent. And he said, every night when they dim the lights on the tier, I kneel down by my bunk with my Bible, and I pray for those kids. And he said, those poor parents, it was never supposed to happen. And he went to his death. And Eddie lived. How did Eddie not go nuts? And I'll tell you why. Because when it was time for Pat's execution, the guards came for Eddie, brought him to a cell, stripped him naked, and were watching him because they're very keen to watch that he doesn't try to hurt himself, commit suicide. For that matter, that's why they watch you so closely on death row when you go on their death watch, because they don't want you committing suicide. Because the state's going to kill you. You can't do it yourself. And they get crazy about women visiting, too, like they're going to try to put a cyanide pill in their bra or something. And they go nuts about visitors and all that kind of stuff, too. You know, try to do a Romeo and Juliet thing and take themselves out, all kinds of crazy stuff, you know. But anyway, and so Eddie, they bring him, and he's there. And I was with Patrick, and I remember this. And he couldn't write because his hands were in handcuffs. So I wrote the words of the letter. Dear Eddie, don't worry about me. God and I are straight. God's going to take care of me. And he said, you got to control your temper in this place or they're going to kill you. And he signed the note, your loving brother, Pat. And Eddie read that letter for 3 years every night before he went to sleep. And he had his brother's love, and that was intact. And then Pat was executed. And I was with him in the death house, and it was so surreal. When Susan Sarandon, when we were doing the film, the word that we both kept saying, she said, this is surreal. And it really was, because you can't tell a person's going to die. They're very alive. They're talking to you, drinking coffee, talking like we're talking tonight. And then you just watch and you watch. The only way you know they're going to die is with your watch, and then you watch the activity. And he was watching through the door where his cell was, where he could see through it. The door kept opening, and he goes, that's the electrician. Sure enough, lights dim. He's practicing. He's testing the chair, making sure all the circuits are working. For your death, people coming in, associate wardens in three-piece suits, your death. People are assembling for your death. Witnesses coming in, being led into the room. Secretary was typing. I said, what's that typing? Well, that's the forms the witness is going to sign afterwards. And I was with him. And there's a beautiful woman here tonight who works with hospice who just talks about it in terms of just being present to people who are dying, and you accompany them, presence. And I had never done this before, but believe me, it crystallized very quickly. My role was simply one of presence to him and to give him dignity. And he said to me, he said, Sister Helen, listen, you can't be there at the end because you can't see this because it could scar you. And I look in his eyes, and he's terrified. I'd be terrified, too, if I knew I was strapped in a chair and they were going to put 1,900 volts through my body 3 times. And he was trying to protect me. And I said, no, Pat, no. Look, I'll be there. You look at me. I said, there is no way you're going to die alone without a loving face to see. It's not to make Patrick Sonier a hero, but he was a human being. And when I did have a chance to dialogue with the Pope about this, I said, Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church uphold the inviolable dignity only of the innocent? What about the guilty? There is no dignity in a man being rendered defenseless and walking to his death, and Pat saying to me, pray that God holds up my legs. People struggle for control to walk across a room, and they have waited for this death 17 years, 15 years, 10 years. And the thing is, you can't control your dreams. You can control your consciousness, but not your dreams. And when Pat was in the death house, he said, I don't want to sleep because the nightmare is going to come. I know what it is. And the guards are coming for me. And they're coming to drag me out of my cell. And I'm going, no, no. And I'm sweating. I'm screaming. Suddenly I wake up. And I look around. I'm in my cell. It's not my time to go. And also watching others be led to their deaths. The second story in the book that I'm writing that'll be coming out on December 28th, The Death of Innocence, is Joseph Adele. He watched 20 men that he knew brought to the death house that he had gotten to know on the tier over the years that he was there. Once he was brought down right next to the execution chamber and watched 2, one a close friend, being showered, being put into the white jumpsuits, and being brought to their deaths. And so when it was time, Patrick gave me his Bible. He handed it to me. And as they brought him out, they got this in the film. I worked really closely with Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins on the film of Dead Man Walking. I was given a great gift, very trustworthy artist who wanted to bring the American public over to both sides of this issue to help people to start reflecting on the death penalty. And you see, and it's just the way it was, because when they brought him out, he said to the warden, can Sister Helen touch my arm? And I'd never touched him before. You know, most visits in prison, on death row, they don't allow you to touch the prisoner. First time I ever touched him. The stories of the Gospels are that Jesus touched people, the human touch. One time I asked Pat, what's the hardest? He said, I'm never touched. One time a guard let me hug my little girl. I'm never touched. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and we walked. And next thing I knew, we were in the chamber, and there were the witnesses sitting there. And I was leaving him. Then the guard had me by either arm, and I just leaned over, and I kissed him on the back, and I said, Pat, pray for me. And then I sat with the witnesses, and as they were strapping him in the chair, his eyes found mine. And I reached my hand out to him like this, just like you see Susan do in the film. And he said, I love you, I could tell. And I said that to him. It's the last words he ever heard. And the last thing, though, before they electrocute people is they put a mask over their face to protect the witnesses from seeing their face, which gets so contorted when the electrical current pulls through their body. And so I closed my eyes. I knew he couldn't see me anymore with this good lawyer. I mean, these lawyers are my heroes. These lawyers, I gave a talk to women lawyers last night in Santa Cruz, and they said, you going to start with any lawyer jokes? I said, I don't have any lawyer jokes. My lawyers that I know are heroes because they use all of their talents and their skills to try to save lives and work for human rights. And I'm holding Millard's hand, and holding Pat's Bible and hear as they clank that switch, and then look and see as the doctor's putting that little pen light in the eyes that don't see, and stethoscope to the heart that has been stopped forever. And Louisiana showed that we now had killed Patrick Sonier. And later Eddie Sonier said, now 3 people are dead instead of 2 because of me. I came out of the execution chamber that night. I'd never been exposed to anything like this in my life. Couldn't believe it was all happening. And I did the first logical thing that anybody would do, or maybe not so logical, but I threw up. And the sisters were waiting there, and they put me in the car. It was so cold. Executions have this effect. They make you feel cold, cold inside. And it was the middle of the night, and we were driving down this dark road away from our penitentiary, which is way in the middle of nowhere. And I was thinking to myself, nobody is ever going to see this. This is almost like a secret ritual. And people going to read in the paper the next morning, justice was done. This was a crime. I had been brought in as a witness. My job was to tell the story. And I began to, whoever would listen to me, I began to give talks. Believe me, before the film, we are talking about some pitiful little bitty crowds. I mean, like St. Christopher's nursing home after lunch. Who wants to hear the death penalty? None. And 3 people went with me in this little room. And I'm not kidding you, after 10 minutes, 2 of them were gone. I mean, gone. And this one lady was listening, and my eyes are locked and saying, lady, don't leave me. Don't leave me. And you know, Goethe said that when we are committed to a cause that is right and just and unswerving in our commitment, providence moves for us and resources make their way to us. The book came out in '93, nowhere near the bestseller list, only in the Seattle area where it rains a lot, kind of bumped up a bit. But, I mean, who's buying a nun by a Roman Catholic nun on the death penalty where everybody and their cat thought it was a great thing to do? '93. And then at the end of '94, one day I got a phone call. And you know, when you write a book is like a child. You don't know where that book is going to go. That book has a life of its own. And it goes where it wants to go. I get a phone call, and the voice on the other end says, hi, I'm Susan Sarandon, and I'm reading your book. I'm filming The Client in Memphis, and I have to come to New Orleans for a couple of days of filming, and I would love to meet you. I said, Susan, I would love to meet you too. And I'd heard about her from Amnesty International, that she was great on human rights. Rent Thelma Louise, see what she looks like when she comes into the, to the theater. Get her mixed up with Gina Davis. So the whole movie I'm looking at Gina Davis. She comes in the restaurant. I said, thank God she's Louise, because I'd like Louise a lot. Gina Davis was really ditzy. I mean, it had got him in more and more and more trouble. Susan and I talked. She says this needs to be a film to help the American public get deeper under the surface of all this kind of rhetorical stuff. They did the crime. They deserve to fry. She pestered Tim Robbins for 9 months till he broke down and read the book. They did the film. Every Hollywood studio, when they got the script, turned it down. They said, Tim, it's a downer. The guy's going to die in the end, and then we got no, romantic element. You got a nun with the death row inmate. And if we could spice it up a little bit now with the nun and the death row inmate, we might have ourselves a little story. And Tim was going, no, it's about redemption. It's a story about redemption. They didn't get it. Then Polygram Film International, it only had one successful film, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, because they did albums. They picked up Dead Man Walking. And 1 year later or less, in Catholic churches, the Feast of the Annunciation, Susan stepped up on the stage at the Academy Awards with 1.3 billion people watching, and Dead Man Walking was given over to the world. I'm not kidding you. 2 months afterwards, I was in Japan, and a taxi cab driver was going, Dead Man Walking, Dead Man Walking. Everybody heard it. It just went all over. My nephew was in Kathmandu in Nepal, going down this crooked little narrow street, a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant, in the front window, a little slate shoved up in the front, Dead Man Walking tonight. When we do our little part, when we do our little part of what we're supposed to do and we turn it over and we're working for life and we're working for justice and we're working for human dignity and we're working for human rights, and I see students smiling because you know we only have one life, and we cannot afford to spend it on trivial stuff like going, getting a job and making money and all that stuff. We got to really use the talents and gifts that we've been given to work for soul-sized work. And I want to invite you to dig into this issue. Because some people say, well, the death penalty, it's kind of a little peripheral issue, you know, about these murders and what to do with them. It's not a peripheral issue. You pull the thread on the death penalty, and every wound we got in this society comes up with it. Our racism, our blaming and targeting the poor to bear the burden of things that happen. Only poor people are selective execution. And our penchant for trying to solve social problems that are complex by violent solutions. Well, we just take some of them and kill them. And look at the paradigm of the death penalty. It is not unrelated to what is going on in Iraq. What's the paradigm for the war on crime? Select the worst of the worst killers and kill them. What's the paradigm then for the war on terrorism? Go after the really bad ones and kill them. So bomb the Taliban in Afghanistan and go after Saddam Hussein. Where is terrorism in the world today? If you don't have boundaries and you don't have an enemy with a face and a name and a boundary, how do you know where the enemy is? Have we stopped the war on terrorism? Have we stopped terrorism? Or have we ignited it and now we don't know where it is? We have to look at these things. Simply to criminalize something and to punish people, especially with violence. It's time for us as a nation to grow up. It's time for us to mature and take our place with the majority of nations in the world that choose not to kill people because we have an alternative way to make us safe. I want to invite you to sign the petition for the moratorium campaign tonight. I want to invite you to get the book. Students, you get them for $10. Normally they're $15, but whatever. I want you to read the book. And I want to ask you about my new book, which will come out December 28th. You can help the book because you can pre-order it on Amazon.com and just ask for Death of Innocence. It's ENTS. And they have a pre-order form. And the more people that do that, the more Amazon's going to bump it up. And they get 2 million hits a day on Amazon. We want to get that book out there because it takes you on an incredible journey, which you only know because people like me, who have been there, can take you there, because you're never going to see it. I'll be there afterwards to sign the books. If any of you have a rich aunt, there's a book that Susan and I both signed for $100 to help the moratorium campaign. I know I'm probably not talking to students here too much, but if you have a rich aunt or somebody, you might, and that helps the moratorium campaign. Okay, I'm going to stop, and let's see our questions. And yes. Well, not really peripheral. You know, all life issues are not peripheral. Here's what I think about abortion. I don't want people to abort their babies. Who does? I mean, let's ask people. Who wants to see abortions? How can we encourage abortions? But here's the question. How do we, this is a very complex thing, especially now with pharmaceutical, with pills, that people who have sex one night can go in their bathroom the next morning, take 3 pills, and they don't get pregnant. Look at the candidates. Look at what people say. You know, and Maria Augusta Neal, one of the things she said was, who gets to define the situation? The way this issue is usually defined, what you usually hear people say is, Kerry's for abortion. Bush is against abortion. That's the way it's usually defined. And I've been asking students to reflect. What does Mr. Bush really want us to do to stop abortions? What is his, how do we help people? How do we help women not have abortions? What is he really suggesting? And he's suggesting on this issue the same as for drugs. We criminalize it. We reverse Roe v. Wade and we make it against the law, and so it's illegal to have abortion. So if you have an abortion, you have broken the law. And what is that going to mean? You can't have something that's a law and then you don't enforce it, because that's disrespecting the law. That's saying the law doesn't really matter. How are we going to enforce that law? That means anyone who has an abortion, any pharmaceutical company that give people pills for abortion, any doctor participates in abortion can be prosecuted. They can be brought to trial, and they can be sent to prison. How are we ever going to do that? I try to follow the gospel of Jesus, which is one of persuasion and community and welcome and support. What's the main reason people have abortions? Unwanted pregnancies. Young girls by themselves about to start college. Where's the boyfriend? Oh my God, I'm pregnant. What am I going to do? Under pressure. People, I do not believe that women lightly abort their children. I have met people. When I go to sign those books afterwards, all kind of people, when they come up and they get in their book signed, they whisper things to me. I have met women who years afterwards had an abortion and they're still struggling with what they did. It's a huge thing to decide that. But how as a community do we support women, welcome women, help women, give them the support they need to make choices for life? Most people, I think, agree on the value of not wanting abortion. They disagree on the strategy of how to do it. And if you look at, people call Bush pro-life, it's very hard for me to see George Bush as pro-life. I mean, because he officiated at 152 executions in Texas without blinking an eye, and he has plunged the people of Iraq in this terrible war. He lied to us about the reasons why he was doing it. And then all the laws, we have more poor people now. What happens to children after they're born? Pro-life means you just form before they're born. What happens after they're born? We have more children in poverty now and without health care. We have to tackle the social issues that support life across the board, to help children, to help mothers, to help young single women. That, to me, is what it really means to be pro-life. And I would love to see us be pro-life across the board, to the person that has Alzheimer's and can't say their name, to the young child on the way looking for a chance to be born. I would love to see us be a nation of pro-life. But it is simplistic, and I think it is false to define the issue in a way that simply because somebody says he thinks abortion's wrong and wants to criminalize it is really giving a solution to the problem. Yes. No. I heard of them, though. Matthew Shepard, the young man that was tied to the fence post and was killed. No. And I heard, was it both of them or the father or the mother who asked for the death penalty not to be given to the young men who killed them? Incredible human beings. Yeah. Somebody else on this side? Because I don't want to just get them on this side. I want to get them on this side. Anybody on this side? All right, you're having your chance. Here I go. Yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for coming here, not just for personal reasons that I find with you being in the church to take a stand, not just as, from a religious standpoint, as a person. Yeah. And that in this day now where everything is either politically correct or, whether church and state, okay? Here we have, lawyers sitting next to a religious person that, is compassionate, and we have lawyers here sitting that fight for life, okay? And we're trying to take out everything else, God and everything else. I'd like to thank you personally because you've now opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I have struggled to pursue. Mm-hmm. This was probably a fluke, but it now is more disclosure around allowing me to pursue what I basically
You take care of yourself. Okay, all right. Okay, what's the question?
The question is, how has this affected you from the church? You know, has it been, you know, hard for you to take the criticism, and how has this strengthened you to pursue further?
Okay, the church and criticism. The church is the people. The church is the people, and I travel this country, and I've been with the people of God and many, many Catholics working for peace and justice. That's the church. Now, there's the hierarchy, and in the beginning, I had conflicts with the hierarchy over the death penalty because our Archbishop in New Orleans believed in a death penalty and kept the bishops of Louisiana for 10 years from making any kind of statement against the death penalty. But this book holds a great surprise because through that second man, Joseph Vadell, that I talk about, the one in Virginia, for 12 years he had been asking for one full evidentiary hearing in the courts in DNA, and they wouldn't give it to him. In the end, they killed him, and then they destroyed the DNA evidence, but not before Italy got involved in his case, the Pope got involved in his case, Mother Teresa got involved in his case, and the governor of Virginia got 10,000 faxes, phone calls, and emails from the people of Italy saying, do not kill Joseph Vadell. It almost drove the governor crazy, and he couldn't wait to kill Joseph Vadell. But in that whole process, I got to have a dialogue with the Pope. And I was mentioning to you some of the things I said, and I was able to share. And that was 14 years of experience of sharing with him. Now, dialogue was happening on all sides. I am not the one person. I changed the Pope's mind and changed the Catholic Church teaching on death penalty. But the Catholic Church has changed its teaching, has developed its teaching on the death penalty. And the Pope led right up to the brink in the Gospel of Life, the encyclical he wrote, 95, saying modern societies have a way to incapacitate dangerous people and we don't need to kill. But he still left some loopholes in there. The catechism was changed. And the criteria that the Catholic Church has used for 1,700 years, other Christian churches too, for grave or grievous crimes the state can execute, they cut that criteria out. So no matter how grave the crime, no matter how grievous the crime, the fact is, who are we as a society? We don't need to imitate the violence, and that's not the criteria we use anymore. We have a way to incapacitate dangerous people, and we do not make it dependent on governments interpreting what they call a grievous or grievous crime, like adultery in some countries or whatever. Whenever you leave up to government the right to decide what a grave or grievous crime is, they invariably are going to turn to politics, and they always are going to go after the people that are the poorest, that have no defense. We cannot let governments decide that. We don't need the death penalty anymore. A majority of countries in the world don't have it, and let us join them. Let us join the other nations of the world. And I encourage you, that signature you put on that moratorium petition is one of the most precious gifts you have to give, because it is you, and it is your commitment. And I hope that will be the beginning of a commitment. Your names are going to be sent to death penalty folks working in this state to end the death penalty in California, and let us all be part of that together. I'll meet the rest of you out at the books. Be glad to sign the books for you, and thank you for coming. I'll see you out there at the books. Thank you.